The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known universe. Its walls stretched so high that clouds formed near the ceiling, and its floor could hold the populations of entire planets. For 12,000 years, this hall had been the center of galactic civilization. Every major decision, every war declaration, every trade agreement had been made within these ancient walls. Ambassador. Daniel Wright walked across the polished stone floor, his footsteps echoing in the vast silence. Behind him walked his aide, a young woman named Catherine Moore, who carried a single data tablet. The human delegation was small compared to others. The Volari brought hundreds of attendants. The Crocian traveled with military escorts. The Nethkai came with entire floating platforms of advisors. But Earth had sent only 2 people. The other species watched from their elevated platforms. As the humans approached the central speaking area, Daniel could feel their eyes on him. Some looked curious. Most looked amused. A few showed open contempt. For 300 years, humanity had been members of this council. They had joined as eager newcomers, grateful for the chance to learn from species who had traveled the stars while humans were still living in caves. They had accepted the lowest positions, followed every rule, and worked harder than any other member species to prove themselves worthy. And for 300 years, they had been treated like children. Daniel remembered his first day as ambassador 20 years ago. He had been so proud, so honored to represent Earth in this ancient hall. He had believed that if humanity just worked hard enough, just proved themselves enough, the older species would eventually accept them as equals. He had been a fool. The Volari delegate rose from his platform. His name was Sarvith, and his scales shimmered with colors that indicated superior amusement. He was 700 years old, young by Volari standards, and he had made a career of putting the human delegation in its place. "The human representative wishes to speak," Sarvith announced, his translator turning his words into the common tongue. "How delightful. I assume you have come to request another favor from your betters." Laughter rippled through the hall. Daniel waited for it to fade. "Actually," he said, "I have come to make an announcement." "An announcement?" Sarvis's scales shifted to colors of mock surprise. "How exciting. Has your species finally developed a new flavor of that brown beverage you are so fond of?" "Coffee? Yes. Perhaps you have bred a new variety of those small, furry creatures you keep as companions." More laughter. Daniel let it wash over him. He had spent the last year preparing for this moment. The decision had not been made lightly. Earth's government had debated for months, analyzing every possible outcome. They had consulted economists, military strategists, and historians. They had studied the Council's 12,000-year history, and they had found something interesting. In all that time, all those millennia, no species had ever voluntarily left the Galactic Council. Species had been expelled. Yes. Some had been destroyed in wars. A few had simply gone extinct. But no one had ever chosen to walk away. The Council believed it was because membership was too valuable. They thought every species in the galaxy needed what the Council provided, but humanity had done the math. They had calculated exactly what they gave to the Council versus what they received. And the numbers were not what the older species expected. "Earth formally withdraws from the Galactic Council," Daniel said, his voice calm and clear. "Effective immediately." The laughter stopped. For a long moment, the Great Hall was completely silent. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Then chaos erupted. Delegates from 100 species began shouting at once. Platforms rose and fell as beings tried to get closer to the speaking area. The Crocian military escort reached for their weapons before remembering that violence was forbidden in the hall. Sarvis's scales had turned completely white, a sign of extreme shock among the Volari. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "This is impossible," he said. "You cannot simply leave. There are treaties, agreements, obligations, all of which include standard withdrawal clauses," Catherine said, stepping forward with her tablet. "Earth has fulfilled every requirement. Our membership ends today. But why?" The question came from the Nethkai platform. Their delegate, an elderly being named Morthax, seemed genuinely confused. What have we done to offend you? We can discuss any grievances through proper channels. Daniel turned to face the old Nethkai. Despite everything, he felt a small amount of sympathy. Morthax was one of the few council members who had treated humans with something approaching respect. It is not about offense, Daniel said. It is about mathematics, he gestured, and Catherine's tablet projected a holographic display for all to see. Numbers and charts filled the air above the speaking platform. In the past 300 years, Earth has contributed 14 trillion credits to the Council's operating budget. We have sent 2 million soldiers to fight in Council-authorized conflicts. We have shared over 90,000 unique technologies, including medical advances that have saved billions of lives across the galaxy. He paused to let the numbers sink in. In return, we have received access to star charts we could have made ourselves. We have been given trade routes that benefit other species more than us. And we have been granted the privilege of being mocked in this hall by beings who believe age equals wisdom. You are young, Sarvith protested. Your species has only been spacefaring for 5 centuries. We have traveled the stars for 60,000 years. Surely you understand that experience must be respected. Experience? Yes, Daniel agreed. Contempt? No. He looked around the hall at the hundreds of species watching him. Some were beginning to understand. Others still seemed confused. A few looked frightened. Humanity joined this council hoping to learn, hoping to grow, hoping to become part of something greater than ourselves. Instead, we learned that the Galactic Council is not a community. It is a hierarchy. And those at the bottom exist only to serve those at the top. He turned back to Sarvith. You asked what humanity has accomplished. Let me tell you. In 500 years of spaceflight, we have developed faster ships than species who have been building them for millennia. Our medical science has solved problems that the Council declared unsolvable. Our engineers have improved technologies that the Valari themselves considered perfect. Improvements that you shared with us, Sarvith said quickly. Improvements that benefited the entire Council. Yes, Daniel nodded. We shared everything. And in return, you laughed at us. You denied us seats on the committees that mattered. You sent our soldiers to die in wars that protected your borders, not ours. You took our gifts and gave us nothing but contempt. He straightened his shoulders. No more. Earth withdraws from the Galactic Council. All treaties are nullified. All agreements are ended. All obligations are complete. He turned and began walking toward the exit. Catherine fell into step beside him. Behind them, the hall erupted into chaos once again. Delegates shouted demands and questions. Some called for guards to stop the humans. Others argued about what this meant for their own species. Daniel did not look back as they reached the great doors. Catherine leaned close and whispered, "Do you think they understand yet? What this really means?" Daniel smiled grimly. "No, but they will. Very soon, they will." The doors closed behind them, and the sound of chaos faded into silence. Earth had just changed the galaxy forever. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, every species in the Galactic Council knew that humanity had done the impossible. They'd walked away. On the great trading station called Nexus Prime, the first effects began almost immediately. Merchant ships that had been loading human goods stopped their work. Buyers who had placed orders worth billions of credits found themselves staring at empty contracts. The price of human products doubled, then tripled, then stopped being listed entirely. Talvex was a Crocian trader who had built his entire business around human goods. He stood in his warehouse, surrounded by the last shipment of Earth products he would ever receive, and tried to understand what had happened. The medical supplies alone, he muttered to his assistant. Do you know how many species depend on human-made medicines? His assistant, a young Crocian named Velkin, pulled up the numbers on his display. 43% of all advanced medical compounds used in Council space are manufactured on Earth, or human colony worlds. Another 21% use human-patented processes. And now those patents are no longer licensed to Council members. Any species that continues using those processes will be in violation of interstellar intellectual property law. Talvex sank into his chair. He had always thought of humans as clever, but ultimately unimportant. They made nice things, yes. Their food was surprisingly good, their entertainment was popular among younger beings, and their medicines were effective. But surely the galaxy could survive without them. Looking at the numbers, he was no longer certain. Far across the galaxy, Admiral Kira Santos stood on the bridge of her flagship, the carrier Washington. Around her, the ships of the 3rd Defense Squadron hung in formation against the backdrop of stars. They had been stationed here for 50 years, guarding the Crocian border against raiders and pirates. Orders confirmed, Admiral, her communications officer reported. All Earth vessels are to return to Sol System immediately. No exceptions. Kira nodded slowly. She had expected this order ever since Ambassador Wright's announcement. Part of her was relieved. Her crews had bled and died for the Council, fighting wars that protected species who openly despised humanity. Now that was over. But another part of her felt something close to guilt. Lieutenant Grant, she said, turning to her tactical officer. What happens to this sector when we leave? Peter Grant was young, barely 30. But he was one of the best tactical minds in the fleet. He studied his displays for a moment before answering. The Ravagers have been probing this border for decades, Admiral. The only thing keeping them back is our presence. The Crocian Navy is large, but their tactics are outdated. Their ships are slower than ours, and their weapons are less accurate. How long until the Ravagers attack? If they realize we are leaving? Weeks, maybe days. Kira turned to look out the main viewport. Somewhere beyond those stars, the Ravagers were waiting. They were a nomadic species, traveling in massive fleets that stripped entire worlds of resources before moving on. The Council had held them at bay for centuries, but the human squadrons had always been the backbone of that defense. That is not our problem anymore, she said finally. Set course for Sol System. All ships. Admiral Peter said quietly, there are Crocian civilians on the colony worlds in this sector. If the Ravagers break through, ... I know. Kira's voice was hard. But we were not the ones who decided to treat humanity like servants. We were not the ones who laughed when our soldiers died defending their borders. The Crocian made their choice. Now they face the consequences. She gave the order, and one by one, the human ships turned toward home. On the Nethkai homeworld. The High Council met in emergency session. Their species had been spacefaring for 8,000 years, and they had seen many crises. But none quite like this. Our entire planetary defense network was designed by human engineers, the defense minister reported. Our ships use human navigation systems. Our factories run on human-optimized software. Can we not simply continue using these systems? The eldest asked. He was over 2,000 years old, the oldest living Nethkai, and he had never imagined a galaxy without human participation. The systems require regular updates and maintenance, the defense minister explained. Human technicians have always provided these services. Without them, our systems will begin to degrade within months. Then we train our own technicians. That would take years, decades perhaps. Human engineering is different from our own. They think in ways we do not naturally understand. The eldest waved his tentacles in frustration. How did we become so dependent on them? They are children. They have been spacefaring for less than 500 years. Perhaps the trade minister said carefully, that is precisely why we became dependent on them. We assumed they would always be there, always eager to help, always grateful for our guidance. We never imagined they might leave. The truth of those words hung in the air like a bad smell. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. The Volari discovered that human agricultural techniques fed a third of their population. The Crocian learned that human fuel refinement processes powered 60% of their military fleet. The small species who had joined the Council in the last 1,000 years found that most of their technology licenses were held by human corporations. The galaxy had not realized how much it needed humanity until humanity was gone. On Earth, President Maria Lopez watched the chaos unfold from her office in Geneva. Reports poured in from every corner of known space. Economies were collapsing. Military defenses were failing. Species that had barely spoken to humans were now desperately trying to open diplomatic channels. "They are panicking," her advisor, Nathan Cole, said, scrolling through the latest messages. "The Valari have already offered to grant us 3 seats on the security committee if we return. The same committee they said we would never be ready for." Maria asked dryly. "The very same." She shook her head. "It is too late for that. They had 300 years to treat us fairly. They chose not to. What do we tell them?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the Swiss mountains. Earth was beautiful. It had always been beautiful. And now, for the first time in 3 centuries, its future belonged entirely to its own people. "Tell them nothing," she said finally. "Let them understand what they have lost. Let them feel what it means to be alone." She turned away from the window. "And then, when they are ready to truly listen, we will talk. But not as servants. Never again as servants." The galaxy was falling into chaos. Species that had ruled the stars for millennia were discovering that they could not survive without. The young upstarts they had mocked and dismissed, and humanity, for the first time in 300 years, was finally free. 6 months had passed since Earth's withdrawal, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one had predicted. The Ravagers struck first. They had been watching the Crocian border for decades, waiting for the moment of weakness they knew would eventually come. When the human squadrons departed, they moved with terrifying speed. The first Crocian colony to fall was called Velthoria. It was a mining world with a population of 3 million. The Ravagers arrived with a fleet of 200 ships, and the local defense force lasted less than an hour. General Verkith received the distress call on his flagship, but by the time his fleet arrived, Velthoria was already burning. The Ravagers had taken everything of value and killed everyone who resisted. The survivors were few, and their stories were terrible. Where were the humans? One survivor screamed at the rescue teams. "They always protected us." Where did they go? The answer was simple but painful. The humans had gone home. They had warned the Council for decades that the Ravager threat was growing, that more resources were needed for border defense. The Council had ignored those warnings, preferring to spend credits on luxury projects and political ceremonies. Now the bills were coming due. The second colony fell a week later, then a third. The Crocian navy fought bravely, but they were outmatched. Their ships were slower than the Ravager vessels, and their tactics had not changed in centuries. They had grown comfortable hiding behind human protection. Council Chairman Velmuth sent message after message to Earth, pleading for assistance. Each message was more desperate than the last. "We recognize our past errors," one message said. "We are prepared to offer full partnership status to humanity. Please, we need your help. Millions of lives are at stake." President Maria Lopez read each message carefully. She understood the suffering that was happening across the galaxy. She was not a cruel person. The deaths of innocent civilians weighed heavily on her conscience. But she also remembered the faces of human soldiers who had died, defending Crocian worlds. She remembered the families who had lost sons and daughters in wars that were not their own. She remembered 300 years of sacrifices that had been met with nothing but contempt. "What do you recommend?" she asked Nathan Cole during one of their daily briefings. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "If we help them now, nothing changes. They will be grateful for a few years, maybe a decade, and then they will go back to treating us the same way. The only way to truly change things is to let them feel the full weight of their mistakes, even if it means millions of deaths. Those deaths are not our responsibility. We did not create the Ravagers. We did not weaken the Crocian border. We simply stopped doing a job we were never thanked for." Maria nodded slowly. It was a hard truth, but it was still the truth. On Earth's moon, in a research facility that had been secret until 6 months ago, Dr. Linda Park was making history. For centuries, the Galactic Council had banned certain areas of research. They called them dangerous or unstable or impossible. Any species that tried to explore these forbidden fields faced severe punishment. But Earth was no longer part of the Council, and human scientists were finally free to ask the questions that had been forbidden for so long. Are you certain about these readings? Linda asked her assistant, a young physicist named George Kim. George checked the instruments for the 5th time. The readings are correct, Dr. Park. We have achieved stable, faster-than-light communication without any relay stations. Point to point, across any distance, with no delay. Linda stared at the device on her workbench. It was small, barely larger than a human hand, but it represented a breakthrough that the Council had declared impossible for 12,000 years. They told us it could not be done, she whispered. They said the physics would not allow it. Perhaps they did not try hard enough, George suggested. Or perhaps they did not want it to be possible. That thought had occurred to Linda more than once. The Council controlled the galaxy through its network of communication relays. Every message, every piece of information, every order passed through systems that the Council monitored and regulated. A technology that bypassed those systems would be dangerous to their power, perhaps. The Council had not banned this research because it was impossible. Perhaps they had banned it because they knew it was possible, and they were afraid. Linda picked up the device carefully. Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we have succeeded. And tell them we are just getting started. Far from Earth. In a region of space that no Council maps had ever recorded, Captain Samuel Burke guided his ship through unexplored stars, the exploration vessel. Pioneer had been traveling for 3 months, pushing beyond the boundaries of known space. Without Council restrictions, humanity was free to go wherever they wished. And Samuel had wished to go farther than anyone before. His crew was small, just 20 people, but they were the best Earth had to offer. Scientists, engineers, pilots, and soldiers, all chosen for their skill and their sense of adventure. Captain, his navigator called out, I am detecting something unusual on long-range sensors. Samuel moved to the navigation station. The display showed a cluster of objects in orbit around a dead star. At first they looked like asteroids, but their shapes were too regular, too precise. Those are artificial structures, his science officer said, her voice filled with wonder. They are enormous. Each one is larger than Earth's moon. Samuel felt his heart begin to race. How old? The science officer ran the analysis twice before answering. Based on the decay patterns and stellar drift, these structures are at least 50 million years old. Possibly older. 50 million years. That was before any known species had achieved spaceflight. That was before the Volari, before the Crocian, before any of the ancient powers that dominated the Council. Someone else had been here first. Someone no one remembered. Take us in closer, Samuel ordered. Carefully. As the Pioneer approached the ancient structures, its sensors began to pick up more details. The technology was unlike anything in Council records. Power systems that seemed to run on principles humanity did not yet understand. Materials that should not exist according to known physics. Designs that suggested a level of advancement far beyond anything the current galaxy had achieved. Captain, the science officer said slowly, if we can study this technology, if we can understand how it works, ... I know, Samuel replied. Humanity would leap ahead of every species in the galaxy. He thought about the Council, about the species who had mocked humanity for being young and primitive. He thought about the Volari, with their 60,000 years of starflight, and their absolute certainty that they knew everything worth knowing. Perhaps they did not know as much as they believed. Begin full documentation of everything, Samuel ordered. And send a message to Earth. Tell them what we have found. He paused, looking at the ancient structures floating in the darkness. Tell them the future just changed. The galaxy was still in chaos. The Ravagers were still attacking. The old powers were still struggling to survive without human support. But humanity was not waiting for the Council to collapse. They were building something new. Something better. Something that would change everything. And they were only getting started, 1 year after Earth's withdrawal. A delegation from the Galactic Council arrived in the Sol system. Their ship was the largest vessel the Council had ever built. A floating palace, designed to impress and intimidate. It carried representatives from every major species, including Council Chairman Velmuth himself. They came with offers. They came with promises. They came with thinly veiled threats, and they found a humanity they no longer recognized. The delegation was escorted to a space station orbiting Mars, a structure that had not existed 1 year ago. It was massive, elegant, and built using technologies that made Velmuth's engineers gasp in confusion. How is this possible? One of the Valari delegates whispered, "We would need decades to build something like this." They did it in months. Ambassador Daniel Wright met them at the docking bay. He looked older than he had a year ago, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But his posture was straight, and his voice was strong. "Welcome to Unity Station," he said. "Please follow me." The delegation walked through corridors that hummed with unfamiliar energy. They passed laboratories where human scientists worked on devices that defied Council understanding. They saw manufacturing bays where machines built things that should not have been possible, and everywhere they saw confidence. Not arrogance, not anger, the quiet certainty of a species that knew its own worth. The meeting was held in a large conference room with windows, looking out at the red surface of Mars. A year ago, that surface had been barren and dead. Now, green patches were spreading across the landscape. The first signs of a terraforming project that the Council had declared would take centuries. Humanity was doing it in years. Chairman Velmuth was a Nethkai, ancient even by his species standards. He had led the Council for 300 years, guiding it through crises and conflicts with steady wisdom. But he had never faced a situation like this. "Ambassador Wright," he began, his voice carrying the weight of his authority, "the Council has asked me to express our deep regret for past misunderstandings between our peoples. We recognize that humanity has been treated unfairly, and we wish to correct this error." Daniel listened politely but said nothing. Velmuth continued, "We offer humanity full membership in the Council, with all the rights and privileges of founding species. You will have permanent seats on all major committees, including the Security Council. Your votes will carry equal weight with the oldest and most respected species in the galaxy. And in return?" Daniel asked. "In return, humanity will resume its contributions to Council operations. Your ships will return to the border regions. Your technologies will be shared with member species. Your people will once again stand alongside us against common threats." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked around the room at the assembled delegates. He saw Sarvith, the Valari, who had laughed at humanity in the Great Hall. The alien's scales were dull now, showing signs of stress and poor health. The Valari economy had collapsed without human agricultural support, and millions of his people were struggling to find food. He saw representatives from the Crocian, a species that had lost 15 colony worlds to the Ravagers in the past year. Their military was shattered, their confidence destroyed. They no longer looked at humans with contempt. They looked with fear. He saw delegates from smaller species, beings who had watched the great powers crumble and wondered what would happen to them when the old order finally collapsed. "Thank you for your offer," Daniel said finally, "but we are not interested in rejoining the Galactic Council." Velmuth's tentacles trembled with barely controlled emotion. "Ambassador, you must understand our situation. The Ravagers have destroyed over 30 colony worlds. Our economies are failing. Our people are dying. We need humanity's help." "I understand perfectly," Daniel replied. "For 300 years, we helped you. We bled for you. We died for you. And in return, you treated us like servants. You laughed at our requests for equality. You dismissed our concerns about the Ravager threat. You took everything we offered and gave nothing but contempt." "That was a mistake," Velmuth admitted. "A terrible mistake. We see that now. You see it now because you are suffering. When you were comfortable and safe, you did not care about our dignity. You did not care about our contributions. You did not care about the lives of our soldiers." Daniel stood and walked to the window. The green patches on Mars were growing even as they watched, spreading life across a dead world. "Do you know what we have been doing this past year, Chairman? We have not been waiting for you to come and apologize. We have been building. We have been exploring. We have been discovering." He turned back to face the delegation. "Our scientists have achieved faster-than-light communication without relays. Our engineers have developed power systems that make your best technology look primitive. Our explorers have found ancient structures beyond council space, structures built by a civilization that existed before any of your species walked upright. The delegates exchanged shocked looks. These claims seemed impossible, but looking at Unity Station, looking at the transformation of Mars, they could not simply dismiss them. "We are not the children you once mocked," Daniel continued. "We are not the servants you once commanded. We are humanity, and we have outgrown your council." "Then what do you want?" Velmuth asked, his voice desperate. "What can we offer you? Name your price." Daniel smiled slightly. It was not a cruel smile, but it was not a warm one either. "We want nothing from the council. The council is a relic of a past that no longer serves the galaxy. But we are prepared to offer something to you." He pressed a control on the table, and a holographic display appeared. It showed a simple diagram, a network of connections between many different points. "This is the Terran Compact. It is a new alliance, based on principles very different from your council. There is no hierarchy. There are no first-class and second-class members. Every species has equal voice, equal vote, equal dignity." The delegates studied the display with growing interest. "Several smaller species have already joined," Daniel explained. "The Irani, the Kelith, the Vash. Others are considering membership. These are species who were treated as badly by the council as we were, species who understand what it means to be dismissed and ignored. And you want us to join this alliance?" Velmuth asked. "That is not possible," Daniel said bluntly. "The Terran Compact is for species who believe in equality. The great powers of the council have never believed in anything but their own superiority. You would need to change everything about your societies before you could qualify for membership." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But we are willing to negotiate individual agreements with council species, trade treaties, technology exchanges, perhaps even mutual defense pacts, on a case-by-case basis, with terms that reflect fair partnership rather than exploitation." Velmuth was silent for a long moment. He had come to this meeting expecting to bring humanity back under council control. Instead, he was being offered a chance to survive, if he was willing to accept terms that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "And the Ravagers?" he asked finally. "If we negotiate these agreements, will humanity help us against the Ravagers?" "Perhaps," Daniel said. "If you can convince us that you truly understand what went wrong, if you can show us that you are willing to change, if you can prove that you will treat us as partners, not as servants." He looked around the room one more time. "The choice is yours. The galaxy is changing. You can change with it, or you can be left behind." The delegation departed Unity Station 3 days later, carrying terms that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. The old order was dying. Something new was being born, and at the center of it all stood humanity. It's no longer asking for respect. They had simply taken it. 5 years had passed since Earth walked out of the Galactic Council. In that time, the universe had transformed beyond recognition. The Council itself no longer existed. It had collapsed 2 years after humanity's withdrawal. It's torn apart by internal conflicts and external threats it could no longer handle. The Volari had splintered into 3 competing factions, each claiming to be the true heir to their species' legacy. The Crocian had lost half their territory to the Ravagers before finally learning to fight effectively. The Nethkai had retreated to their core systems, focusing on survival rather than galactic politics. But from the chaos, something new had emerged. The Terran Compact held its founding ceremony on Earth. On the plains of Kenya, where human ancestors had first walked upright millions of years ago, the location was symbolic, a reminder that every great journey begins with a single step. President Maria Lopez stood before an audience that no human leader had ever addressed. Representatives from 47 species filled the open-air assembly hall. Beings of every shape and size and color imaginable. Some breathed oxygen, others needed special suits to survive in Earth's atmosphere. Some stood on 2 legs, others floated or crawled or slithered, but all of them had come to witness the birth of something unprecedented. 300 years ago, Maria began, humanity joined the stars, believing we would find wisdom and fellowship among the older species. Instead, we found contempt. We found hierarchy. We found a galaxy that measured worth in years of existence rather than quality of character. She paused, looking out at the assembled delegates. We left that galaxy behind, and in doing so, we discovered something wonderful. We were not alone in our frustration. Throughout the council, there were species who had been marginalized, ignored, and dismissed. Species who had gifts to offer but were never given the chance to share them. Species who dreamed of a better way. The Orani delegation cheered, their crystalline bodies ringing like bells. The Keleth raised their forearms in celebration. The Vosh stomped their massive feet in approval. Today, we formalize what began as a simple alliance. The Terran Compact is not a replacement for the Galactic Council. It is something entirely new, a community of equals, where no species is above another, where every voice matters, where cooperation replaces competition. She stepped back from the podium, and another figure took her place. Daniel Wright had served as ambassador, then as Secretary General of the Provisional Compact. Now, he would become its first permanent leader, chosen by vote of all member species. The universe is vast, Daniel said, and we have only begun to explore it. Our scientists continue to study the ancient structures we found beyond council space. We are learning things about the cosmos that the old powers never imagined. We are developing technologies that will change everything. He smiled, and there was genuine warmth in his expression. But technology is not what makes the Compact special. What makes us special is our belief that every species has value. That wisdom does not come only with age. That the youngest civilization might have ideas that the oldest never considered. The ceremony continued for hours, with representatives from each species speaking their commitments to the Compact. There were treaties signed, agreements formalized, and promises made. When it was finally complete, the sun was setting over the African plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Later that evening, Daniel stood alone on a balcony overlooking the assembly grounds. Most of the delegates had retired to their quarters, but small groups still wandered the gardens below. Beings from different worlds talking and laughing together. Catherine Moore found him there, just as she had found him in the council hall 5 years ago. "You should be celebrating," she said. "This is your victory." Daniel shook his head. "It is not about victory. It never was." "Then what was it about?" He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "When I was young, I believed that if humanity just worked hard enough, the older species would eventually accept us. I thought respect was something you earned through service and sacrifice. I was wrong." He turned to face her. "Respect is not given. It cannot be earned. It must be demanded. The Council would never have treated us as equals no matter how long we served them. They did not see us as worthy, and they never would have. The only way to change that was to leave. And now." Daniel looked back at the gathering below. A young Keleth was teaching a human child a game from her homeworld. A group of Orani were comparing notes with Nefkai scientists about shared research interests. A Croatian military officer was engaged in deep conversation with Admiral Kira Santos about the ongoing campaign against the Ravagers. Now we have something better than acceptance from the old powers. We have partnership with those who share our values. We have the freedom to build the future we want rather than the future others chose for us. Catherine nodded slowly. "The Valari delegate asked to meet with you tomorrow. They want to discuss joining the Compact." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "The same Valari who laughed at us in the council hall. Different faction. Younger generation. They say they understand what went wrong and want to do better." Daniel considered this for a long moment. Part of him wanted to refuse to make the Valari feel the same dismissal they had shown humanity for centuries. It would be satisfying, but it would also be wrong. "Set up the meeting," he said finally. "If they are sincere about change, we should give them the chance to prove it. That is what the Compact is about. Not revenge. Not dominance. Just the opportunity for every species to stand as equals." Catherine smiled. "You have changed since the council days." "I hope so. I hope we all have." The next morning, the first session of the Compact Assembly began. There were debates about trade routes and resource sharing, about defensive alliances and scientific cooperation. There were disagreements and compromises, successes and setbacks. It was messy. It was difficult. It was nothing like the rigid hierarchy of the old council. It was perfect. In the years that followed, the Terran Compact grew beyond anything its founders had imagined. More species joined, drawn by the promise of equality and the reality of cooperation. The ancient technology from the structures beyond known space was slowly decoded, yielding discoveries that transformed life for trillions of beings. The Ravagers were eventually defeated, not by any single species, but by a coalition that combined human tactics with Croshan strength, Nethkai intelligence, and the unique abilities of a dozen other civilizations. It was proof that diversity was not weakness but power, and at the center of it all stood humanity. Not as leaders, not as servants, but as partners in an enterprise greater than any species could achieve alone. They had left the Galactic Council expecting to find isolation. Instead, they had found something far more valuable. They had found a family. The universe had fallen into panic when Earth withdrew. But from that panic, something beautiful had emerged. Not a hierarchy of old powers looking down on newcomers, but a community of equals, building something new together. The stars were no longer cold and empty. They were full of friends, and that, Daniel thought, as he watched the compact assembly debate the future, was worth everything humanity had sacrificed. It was worth everything they had become. The end.